Well, it's the end of September and it's time to clean up some of the garden. We haven't had a super prolific season for tomatoes. I'm still waiting on some of them to ripen up. But we did get a great harvest of spaghetti squash that was already cut the other day while I was out of town. And now we're going to get rid of the last of the spaghetti squash vines in here. Probably harvest the acorn squash for whatever is ready to be harvested at this time. However, my zucchini and my yellow squash plants are still looking pretty good, and I should be able to get a little bit more of a crop off of them. And there's a few more of the zucchinis on both of these that I'm hoping to get another last little bit off of. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull out the squash plants and the cucumber plants. This is just 2 plants and it went crazy. I got a lot more cucumbers than I was bargaining for this year. You could still see that there's a lot of really teeny ones that, if I gave it a chance, might finish up. But I've literally canned so much more cucumber than I had hoped to do, between lots of pickles, a lot of relish. I'm ready to be done with it. And I'm not a huge cucumber fan anyway, just for eating. So although I have been eating some of them individually on sandwiches and things, it's time for it to go. So that's going to come out today as well. Alright, so it's about time to harvest these butternut squash. This is my first year doing a variety of different kinds of squash, and so I've done a lot of research on when's the right time to pick them and all of that. And they say with the butternut, you can just use your thumb and pierce the skin with your thumb, and if it doesn't pierce, then it's cured. And then the other thing that you can test is if the, oh, that one wanted to come off. I guess I'm eating that one tonight. If the stem is starting to brown from the actual vine. And they're getting close, but they're not quite ready over here. So this squash plant is going to stay a little while longer. And the other type of squash that I have in here is acorn squash, which is actually my favorite. You can see a couple of them. Ooh, big disgusting spider. Let's get rid of him. That's like the worst thing about fall is spiders coming out. I hate it. Oh. Anyway, there's a little bit of tomato tangled in here too still because they're on the outside. But the acorn squash are these guys up here, and I've been keeping a good eye on them when I've been home. They've just about all of them have darkened up, and just like with some of the other squash plants, the best time to harvest them is when they've darkened and their stem starts to get brown just like the others. So I'm actually going to leave these acorn squash a little bit longer. Here, I'll show you this one down here. I'm going to leave them just a little bit longer. I leave again in less than 2 weeks for another horse show, so I'm probably going to get them harvested before I leave. However, I did read that for squash, it can be good to let them go through a first frost, and that can kind of help them as well. So the acorn and the butternut are going to wait a little while longer. I'm pretty happy with how the artichoke did this year. It's the first time doing it. I'm hoping that this bed that I'm standing in will actually become a perennial bed. I tried squash because that's what I could get my hands on this year, and I hadn't tried it before. I'm very happy that I did. But I think next year I'm going to put the squash over in the front garden that I've been slowly trying to develop into something. This garden space is less established. I just started that other garden when we were having all the quarantine. And the squash is great. This vertical method has worked very well for me. But this particular bed that I'm in, I do want it to be one of the perennial beds, and hopefully grow some asparagus in here as well. And not to mention, in this fenced-in primary garden, I gotta leave that one because that's still growing. This is one of the full sun beds, so it's kind of prime real estate. It worked really well for the squash, but I'd like to be able to use it for other things next year and let the squash sprawl where I'm currently growing pumpkins. And yeah, that'll be the plan for next year, I think. And I have a fence over there too, so it can still kind of trellis up like this one has been doing. So all I was doing right now is just trimming back some of this squash plant that has gotten a lot of powdery mildew on it, and just since I'm home today, thought it'd be nice to get some of this cleaned up. But since I'm still allowing some of the acorn squash to finish ripening, I can't really cut back the whole thing just yet. So I got to be kind of careful with which spots I'm cutting back so the rest of the plant can keep finishing up ripening for those squash. Check out this beauty. This was a plant, I've just trimmed it back. I got it from Wilco, and I think all it said was squash. Not what kind or anything, and it's just beautiful. I can't wait to harvest this eventually and see what it is. It looks a lot like an acorn squash, just with different colors. So if anybody knows what this one is, I'd love to hear from you. But I think this one's just so pretty and so fall. If there's anything more fall-like than squash plants, it would be this one with the beautiful coloring on it. So I have cut back just all of the real bad leaves on this yellow squash plant that had all of the powdery mildew on it. A big old pile of other squash things over here. But I wanted to add that this is something that I learned this year doing yellow squash and zucchini, was that throughout the season, you can see where this main vine is coming out of the ground. As the growing progresses throughout the season, you actually can cut all of the dead or bad leaves, the things that are getting brown or have powdery mildew on them. You can cut them back and it'll just keep continuing to grow along the same stalk, and won't be putting energy into the other leaves that helped produce the fruit at that time. So in an effort to keep this guy going a little while longer, I got rid of the leaves, the bad ones with the powdery mildew. I may give these ones an Epsom salt bath just to help them last a little bit longer, since there is a little bit of damage on there. But I left the leaves surrounding the current area that is producing fruit, and hopefully we continue to get a pretty nice harvest. But just wanted to share that little trick that I learned this year that has kept me with yellow squash and zucchini for a long time. And this has been my only yellow squash plant this whole season, and I've had multiple yellow squash to eat every single week. So this bed that had all the spaghetti squash is much more cleaned up. Like I said, I'm still leaving some of the other squash varieties, but this one's clean and ready to get the trellis removed here shortly and amend the bed for the winter. Now I'm going to move on to clearing out the cucumbers. Look at this, it still has blooms. This plant still had blooms and was still trying to grow some more cucumbers. So I think the plan for next year is one cucumber plant, and I'll let it go longer. but I definitely don't need two. Still not quite a bit. There we go. That was a whole heck of a lot easier than the squash plants. These have those tendrils that grab, but they're not as strong and severe as the squash plants. So cucumbers are done. The other thing to give an update on is how the green beans are doing. Honestly, this is one pole bean plant. None of the other ones survived, so we haven't had a huge harvest off of it, but I've always had enough that I could make dinner from it. And since beans like some of the cooler weather, I'm going to continue to let that one stay in the ground. I don't think this harvest is quite worth the effort of doing the dilly beans with, but it's enough for dinner for sure. That was all of it there. A couple large handfuls.